The fundraising numbers are in, and one candidate appears to be leaving rivals in the dust. The CBC's JP Tasker joins us now. So, JP, this is some of our first hard data in the leadership race. Walk us through it.
Yeah, candidates are always boasting about how well they're doing, right? And there's lots of claims being thrown around during an election campaign. Now we have some actual hard data as to how well these candidates are doing in the race to replace Justin Trudeau. And it's very clear Mark Carney has what is probably an insurmountable lead in terms of fundraising at this point. He is outpacing all of the other candidates in terms of the amount of money that has been hauled into this point. Let's bring up the chart and show all our viewers where people are at as of this point, as of really Sunday when they had to submit this data. Although the data likely dates back to last week. So Mark Carney's at $1.9 million from 11,260 contributors. Karina Gould, $236,000 from 1,375 contributors. Frank Baylis, $227,000 from 188 contributors. Chrystia Freeland, $226,000 from 332 contributors, although there is a major asterisk there. We'll get to that in a second. And Ruby Dhalla, $144,000 from 109 contributors. So why did I say there's an asterisk there next to Chrystia Freeland? Well, her campaign tells us that the data that is with Elections Canada right now is incomplete, that it does not tell the whole picture. Essentially what happened is that some of their money was routed through the party itself. So the party was holding on to some of their campaign funds. That money was not released to the campaign before this data was presented to Elections Canada. So they say the numbers that have been reported today really undercount just how much money they have pulled into this point and how many contributors they can actually add to their list. So the campaign tells us their actual figures to this point, they've raised $600,000 from a total of over 2,000 donors. So that puts her just below Mark Carney.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to say, when the Elections Canada data first came out, we were all pretty bowled over in the newsroom to see Chrystia Freeland so close to the bottom of the list. Right. Obviously, $600,000, much better, although, you know, not a third of what Mark Carney's campaign is saying they raised up to this point. Help us understand where this leaves the race.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Carney has raised nearly more than 3 times the amount that Chrystia Freeland has pulled into this point if we're to use the numbers that her team has provided to us. He's got $1.9 million, she's got $600,000. His money is coming from nearly 6 times the number of donors. He's got about 11,260 contributors. She's at about 2,000. So many more people have opened up their checkbook to cut Mark Carney a check and give him some more cash compared to what they've given Chrystia Freeland. And when you pair that with the 83 Liberal MPs that have so far endorsed Mark Carney, it does suggest that he is the front runner in this race. He's got a lot more money and many more MPs lining up behind his candidacy than Chrystia Freeland or Karina Gould or any of the other MPs or candidates that are in this race. And how do Mark Carney's numbers compare to Pierre Poilievre and what he went through in his leadership race in 2022? Well, they compare favorably, frankly. I mean, we know that Pierre Poilievre raised about $10 million over the 7-month-long campaign that he was in to win the Conservative leadership. So that's about $1.4 million a month. Obviously, it's difficult to make an exact comparison because it's a much more constrained election campaign to replace Justin Trudeau. But $1.4 million for Poilievre in a month, $1.9 million for Mark Carney. So that suggests he's doing reasonably well. I would say that. It also suggests there will probably be a big target on Mark Carney's back when they head into those debates next week. A lot of the other contenders will be going after him, knowing he's in the pole position as it stands.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly was a sense of that going into this, but this really solidifies it and quantifies it. Thank you for bringing us all this perspective today. The CBC's JP Tasker, and you can also catch his story on cbc.ca/politics. Okay, it is time now for the Power Panel. Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. Michel Caderio is a former Liberal National Campaign Director. Françoise Boivin is a former NDP MP. And here with me in studio, Kate Harrison is a Conservative political analyst. Welcome, everyone. Before we get into the numbers themselves, I just want to explain that asterisk next to Chrystia Freeland's number. Her campaign says essentially that the party has been holding on to a big chunk of change. And then, in fact, she's raised around $600,000 for more than 2,000 donors. It's just not showing up on the Elections Canada site yet. Michelle, I'm going to start with you. When you look at these numbers, if you are trying to raise this kind of money, is there anything, I guess, how much do you sweat a gulf like that if you are not in Mark Carney's campaign?
Well, quite a bit, because there were certain benchmarks for the candidates to continue in the race. that they had to meet, and it looks like 5 of them have actually got there. But really, this kind of a show, when it actually gets revealed, it's another kind of indicator of just how strong Mark Carney's campaign is. The fact that, Chrystia Freeland has to go out and explain and put an asterisk behind it is not the best. It's not what you want to be doing when these kinds of numbers come out, right? I think that even more impressive is the number of donors that Mark Carney has. And, quick shout out to Karina Gould. She has definitely surprised me in terms of the money that she's raised, the number of donors, and just kind of how she's kind of hung in there in the race and really tried to develop a different voice that's kind of coming forward and punching through. So, all in all, it's also great as a Liberal to see that, almost $3 million has been raised amongst all of these candidates in a very short period of time. And I think that gives probably a lot of party members hope as you look at the cumulative amounts.
Emily, I want to bring you in here, and I wonder how we make sense of the fact that certainly heading into this moment, Chrystia Freeland, finance minister, deputy prime minister, somebody with a lot of profile, somebody who in many ways is the one that sort of pushed Justin Trudeau off the political cliff, isn't getting fundraising numbers that necessarily match her public profile when you compare them to Mark Carney. How do you understand why that's happening?
For sure. But I think we already had an indication of that before those numbers, and it came with the number of people in cabinet and certainly MPs as well, who actually decided to endorse her. That's when we had a sense that she was not heading where she had wished to go. And so the minute that you saw, it's tricky because Mark Carney is an outsider in many ways, but Chrystia Freeland, people have worked with her. She's been there since the beginning. And so if you have the people who've worked with her for 10 years being like, I'm going to pass on you and choose someone else, it's a message that obviously Liberal Party members who don't necessarily know her personally, or people who are just buying membership cards, are definitely paying attention to that signal. So I think the finance is a result of that. It's like when you don't know someone, you want to get the signals from the people who do know her, and the people who do know her have been saying, I want Mark Carney. And so that's the elephant in the room as far as I'm concerned.
Françoise, I want to bring you in here and ask you, can Chrystia Freeland turn this around? We haven't had the debates yet. Can, perhaps Karina Gould feel that she has a path to victory? And I should probably mention this point just for transparency's sake, that several years ago, my husband did work for Karina Gould. He's a nonpartisan civil servant now, but I just want to be transparent about that connection. So Françoise, does anyone else have a hope based on the numbers that Mark Carney is putting out there?
I honestly don't think so, and not to be pouring rain on their parade, because I'm also very impressed by Karina Gould's performance right now. I mean, from observing the House of Commons regularly, I was already impressed by the way she held herself both in English and in French in the House of Commons as the leader in the House. And I'm not just saying that because you have a link, because now it kind of make me look like I'm trying to be nice to you, but that was my point. So I think it's just giving her a national platform to shine. I agree with Michelle that to have to put an asterisk and explain why your team, and that it's going to come out from Election Canada, and money talks, so it's going to have an impact. The headlines will be Mark Carney ahead at 1.9 million. The rest is in dirt. So she knew that, so it would have been less dirt if she had been at the so-called 600,000 that remains to be seen. But that being said, how can they turn it around? Not even with the debate. I can't picture it, because the membership is pretty much set at this point in time. The donors, the people, the narrative. So how can they change that with just one debate in English? In French, my expectations are not that high, considering the level of French from all the candidates. But I cannot see anybody trying to really punch down like I saw in the years of Ignatieff versus Dion and company, where they were really going at the jugular. Now they know that the real enemy is not one or the other. It is on the other side of the border. So I think they will all be intelligent and be careful. So it doesn't bode well for them to make a big change until the actual date of the vote.
Kate, earlier on in the program, at the beginning of the show, we heard from JP Tasker, who sort of said, well, if you divide the numbers that Pierre Poilievre raised during his leadership race, you could see something comparable in what's happening with Mark Carney compared to Pierre Poilievre. Now, JP did say, and I think everybody understands, circumstances are not the same. It's a little bit hard to do apples and oranges, but he's showing some fundraising prowess here, and I wonder what you think the Conservatives should think about that.
Yeah, I don't know that the number is surprising when you consider he is backed by most of the Liberal establishment. Most of Cabinet has rallied behind him. A lot of caucus members have rallied behind him. So he's drawing from an existing base of donors with deep pockets. He also comes from a background that has very privileged circles. There's a lot of people that he knows. He spoke to his level of connections as a global elite, to use his words. And I'm sure that is attractive to a lot of people in terms of and having him as a political candidate. But I think that this speaks to the importance, his ability to fundraise this in a short period of time, from my perspective, speaks to the importance of confirming his ethics disclosures, right? So making clear for Canadians that he is not in this for business and private and corporate interests that he had in his previous life, that he's in this for the interests of Canadians, and there should be nothing stopping him from sharing those potential conflicts with Canadians so that they can make that determination for themselves.
I will say Mr. Carney's campaign has put out a statement with regards to that. We're going to dig more into that question just in the next block. So I'm going to hold on to that and just look a little bit ahead, more narrowly at the Liberal leadership race. And Michelle, ask you, I mean, Françoise was talking about how this might affect the dynamics of the debate. What kinds of advice do you think candidates are getting right now about how to manage Monday and Tuesday?
Well, I think it depends on who you are, right? If you're Mark Carney, you can't make any mistakes, and you have to try and be prime ministerial, right? Like, this is going to be your first opportunity to be on a stage with your other contestants and your kind of peers, and you have to rise above them because people want to see you as prime minister. Clearly, the Liberals want to see him as prime minister. I think that no matter what, it is a foregone conclusion that he will win. And then for the others, I think for Karina Gould, she wants to have a strong showing, and she wants to be able to kind of speak for the generation that she's been kind of putting herself forward for. She's really looking to probably increase her profile. Chrystia Freeland, she has to punch through. If she wants to change the dynamic of this or try to somehow run against the current that is currently kind of taken over the Liberal Party, then she's going to have a pretty dramatic performance. And that is really hard to do when the expectation of Liberals will also be, keep your eye on the ball. Our real opponent is Pierre Poilievre, and even more so, Donald Trump is kind of the next guy that's going to have to be dealt with. So it'll be tricky, I think, mostly for Chrystia Freeland, but probably the most pressure for Mark Carney.
Yeah, Emily, I'd like you to weigh in on just the question of the French language debate specifically. There's a couple of things going on there. Maybe we'll start with Mark Carney's French, and if you want to bring in Ruby Dhalla's French, we can as well. But Mr. Carney, I mean, he did give an interview to our colleague. He's given a couple of interviews, in fact, to our colleagues at Radio-Canada, including one to Patrice Roy just the other day. But, his French is still... I don't know if a work in progress is the right word. I suppose let's ask the Francophone. Emily, what do you think of Mark Carney's French and how that might play into this debate?
He's more comfortable in English. Mm-hmm. is the way I will put it, and and it's showing. I think first of all, I just wanted to say debates, regardless of the language. I think the two wild cards there are Baylis and Dhalla, in the sense that they have nothing to lose by trying to just draw attention to themselves by saying things that might be creating chaos. And so we need to watch out for that. In terms of the French language debate, it's going to be tricky for basically everyone to have the same level of ease that they have in English, although some of them are more capable in French than others. But I think the person who will be watching the most closely that debate is obviously François Blanchet. So it's a question of whether or not the Liberals are in a position to do a strong showing in Quebec. There's also the question of people have been talking about pipelines, energy east. We know that it's an issue that creates a lot of feelings in Quebec. So people will be also watching out for that. But it's really, if François Blanchet is the one person who will be following the debate the most closely. And it's a question of whether or not you can have a strong Liberal presence showing in Quebec when you don't have a Francophone as a Liberal leader. It's not necessarily been the case historically before. Mm-hmm. The one thing that might be making this the exception is Donald Trump and the level of threat and the loudness in which people have been singing the Canadian national anthem during the hockey match in Montreal, of all places. Like there is something historical going on, and so the old rules don't necessarily apply. But usually, when you don't have a francophone at the helm of the Quebec the federal Liberal Party, you don't necessarily have a strong showing of support in Quebec.
Françoise, having a candidate in Ruby Dhalla who does not speak French, although has stated a willingness to get there, how do you think that is going to impact the Liberal Party, which has historically, of course, positioned itself? They've been such advocates of official bilingualism.
Listen to me. In Quebec, we've heard of so many people who said that they would get there. I mean, we have Mr. Rousseau who heads an airplane company. We have so many people that said, "Oh yes, I will get to there." If Ruby Dhalla had the aspiration to become prime minister one day, I mean, I look at Christy Clark in BC, who stepped down because she knew she would not get, and out of respect. Plus the interview that I think you did with her kind of sealed her fate. So to have Ruby Dhalla there and maybe do an introduction that she will read en français and then a conclusion that she will read en français, I mean, it's just going to give her visibility. More power to her. She's got the money in time. She delivered all her things, and we'll see. Well, all this will bring her. But like Emily, I am expecting, because I got elected first at the same year than Ruby, and believe you me, other candidates. She might come from the right corner and be ready. Don't think it's going to be low balls. And Mr. Bayliss is probably the best en français, by the way, of all of them. So he might
used to represent Pierrefonds on the island of Montreal, right? I do wonder quickly, though, Françoise, I'm just wondering, could this hurt the Liberal Party? There's a risk, certainly in the Francophone media, that the headlines are Ruby Dhalla's lack of French, no?
No, I don't. Okay. I don't think so. As long as Mark Carney did the interview, like you said, us Quebecer, I do personally appreciate people who make the effort, who converse, and imagine doing. It's not your first language, and you're going to do a debate. I mean, every time I did a debate in English, believe you me, it was not necessarily the easiest thing to do, and the Anglophone appreciated it. Well, we do the same. We're exactly the same. So the effort that they will put into it, I mean, they'll get good points. I'm not so sure that it's more the topic, what they will say on energies, what they will say on immigration that might resonate one way or the other with Quebecers.
With Mark Carney emerging as the heir apparent in the Liberal leadership race, have the Conservatives chosen the right plan of attack? Today, they accuse the former Bank of Canada governor of not being transparent with Canadians.
Carbon tax Carney must come clean with Canadians about potential conflicts of interest and all of his business dealings. Canadians can't believe what Mark Carney has said. They can't trust him. He's just like Justin.
While Conservatives continue to beat the carbon tax Carney drum, they appear to be swapping out "Canada is broken" for something a bit more patriotic.
We love our country and our flag. We are a strong people with a proud history as a warrior nation whose soldiers have proven fierce enough to crush the fascists, the communists and Al-Qaeda, yet humble enough to never once brag about their heroism. We are mild-mannered and made of steel. Let me be clear. We will never be the 51st state. We will bear any burden and pay any price to protect the sovereignty and independence of our country.
The Power Panel is back to talk about it all with Émilie Nicolas, Michelle Cadario, Françoise Boivin, and Kate Harrison. Kate, I'm going to start with you. This pressure to have Mark Carney make these disclosures. He says he's resigned from all his other roles. He does not hold public office. There's not like an ethics commissioner's obligation to do this. What is the case that he ought to make these disclosures?
Yeah, I think at this point, Canadians want to see the likely next Prime Minister, even for a period of time, go above and beyond the traditional rules. And the traditional rules are such that Mark Carney could become the Prime Minister and not have to make these disclosures for as long as 4 months. So that is a significant period of time to not disclose potential conflicts of interest. I also think, given the Liberal Party's history with ethics and conflicts violation issues in terms of Justin Trudeau's conflicts of interest.
But what is the potential conflict if he has, as he said on Rosemary Barton Live this weekend, I mean, he's resigned from all the various boards that he's responsible to. He's no longer fulfilling these roles. So where do you see the potential for conflict?
I think it would be important to know, when he was advising the Liberal Party, precisely what role he had. I go back to his Brookfield chairmanship. Brookfield was actively lobbying the Liberal government for money when he was chair of Brookfield, and being very clear about the positions he's held. He is not an average citizen like you or I. He has held very senior roles at high-ranking companies that often are trying to influence the government. So being clear about, where conflict may exist. And I'm not suggesting that Mark Carney has actually done anything wrong. He should just be very clear about the work that he did in these boards while also advising the Liberal government. He hasn't been forthcoming about that, I should say. So now is the time to do it, because he won't have to disclose that. He can go through an entire election campaign having not disclosed that information. And I think that that's something Canadians ought to know, again, to make sure that they are comforted that he is in this for their interests and not some of the interests that he had prior to very recently joining the political forum.
Okay. Michelle, I do want to bring you in on this, but I think we should read a little bit, since this question is about Mr. Carney and his transparency and his integrity, I suppose, fundamentally. I want to read a little bit of the statement that he and his team has passed along, saying he's always adhered to the highest standards of integrity and professionalism in his various roles. He's resigned from all other professional or advisory roles as he focuses on rebuilding the party and delivering change. He'll work to earn a seat in the House of Commons. He's committed to complying with all applicable ethics rules and guidelines. And then at the end, if Mr. Poilievre had any experience outside of partisan politics, we would call on him to meet these same standards. So I guess he's figuring out this politician thing pretty quickly. Françoise, is there a there there? I mean, it's true that this person, that Mr. Carney may well be Prime Minister in a matter of weeks. And because he hasn't run for public office yet, we haven't had him adhere to the standards that someone else might. Is there something he ought to do to reassure Canadians?
Well, I think that for sure, when the time comes, when he actually becomes Prime Minister, he should put forward whatever it is that would be necessary in a very timely manner. I think that that's only fair. And I know that, when I worked with Paul Martin, he went over and above to be transparent in terms of his dealings, in terms of the private trust that he set up, and how he kind of made sure that he was completely separated from any potential conflict. And that was very important to him. And I think that Mark Carney is a man of integrity, and I expect that he will do so. It's interesting how times have changed, though, with, all of a sudden kind of trying to come out and find something on Mark Carney that might stick. And they're just throwing different things up against the wall. I think that they're, trying to tie him to a carbon tax is not working, because Canadians are very focused on what the huge threat is to us. And so now this is just a new thing to kind of, try and get something to stick. So, I think that it should be expected, for sure. But I have every belief that he will do so in good time and well before Canadians have to go to the polls.
Emily, it's not just trying to tie him to the carbon tax or question his former employment, his work on boards. It's been interesting to watch. The Conservatives are in some respects trying to tie him to Donald Trump with this new attack ad that they are going to be putting resources behind, where they in fact go so far as to suggest that policy choices around the carbon tax make him and Justin Trudeau sellouts to Canada. I wonder how effective you think the Conservatives have been thus far in trying to define Mark Carney.
First of all, I think we're being very creative with the definition of conflict of interest. A conflict of interest is when you have current ties with a company, you have a business interest somewhere, or your close one, your immediate family or close friends have some immediate ties with businesses that might interfere with your role that you have in public office. It's not about your resume. And so if we are using the word conflict of interest to talk about past employers, we're getting outside of the definition of conflict of interest. That being said, I do think that although there's this adaptation of Pierre Poilievre trying to pivot from Axe the Tax to Canada First, using red colors, which is historical for the Conservative Party at a rally this weekend. What we're still seeing is basically attacks on the opponent, which I think might be the issue in and of itself in terms of the results in the poll. That's just my instinct. I do believe that we are in a unite as Canadian moment, and that partisan attacks isn't something that a lot of Canadians have an appetite for. And so I think maybe the trap with Pierre Poilievre is that he's been trying to find the right way to attack, while people might not have any patience or time with Canadians attacking other Canadians right now. And so the Liberal government message has been very much focused on what's happening in the US, what's been happening in Europe, and trying to find solutions there. And so, but if you are trying to basically disparage another Canadian as the American government is attacking us, I think you might have the wrong political strategy. And so that's just my hint right now. But we'll see how fast Pierre Poilievre goes with that. But I think it's actually being focused on another Canadian rather than on the Americans that the issue, not how you attack your fellow Canadian.
Françoise, that very much does bring us to the rally this weekend, and I thought it was really interesting the way in which Pierre Poilievre has tried to use a kind of patriotism that attacks his opponents, right? If you look, there was a lot of policy, I thought, in that speech, some of which we hadn't heard before, talking about things like naming future structures and statues after Sir John A. Macdonald, like a lot of things basically suggesting that his fundamental argument, the Liberals have kind of not done right by Canadian history and by Canadians, and he is going to turn all of that around. How effective an argument do you think that is in the moment that we are in, as Emily just spoke about?
Well, I do think that for the crowd that was there, he was catering to them. I mean, today's attack by the Conservative MP, and the same goes with the NDP, by the way, with Matthew Green going after Liberals and Conservatives in a way I haven't heard in the last few weeks, because they've been pretty quiet on their side. Made me think, geez, did I miss a poll somewhere? And lo and behold, I got the Angus Reid, and I went, now I understand. And I think for the Conservative, I was kind of expecting a little shift. Last week, we passed the whole week saying, how will Pierre Poilievre pivot in all that? Mm-hmm. And I think they didn't so much pivot as just decided to adapt a bit their message because of Donald Trump. And they're relying again to the recipe that worked for them for the last 2 years that might not be adapted with the situation and where Canadians are right now. But it gave me an impression, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Kate will say you're totally wrong, but I felt like it's as if it's a desperate move in a sense that They want to retain at least their base because that's basically the message that fits their base. But it's not a message that stands up to the level that Canadians are at facing Donald Trump and the attack that he's making on Canada. And I do think that the Conservatives realize I don't think we can compete on that front. We have to stick to our guns and hope that maybe the same thing will happen in Canada that happened in America, in the United States, that there's people who wants to go back to the good old way of doing this, of doing that, and that it might be their only key to success compared to Mark Carney, who's going up really quickly.
Okay, to try to keep this fair, I think what we're going to do is I'm going to ask for a last comment from Kate and from Michelle, get at least a Conservative and Liberal perspective. The most important thing that you want to communicate vis-a-vis what Pierre Poilievre is doing right now.
Yeah, I think what I took away from the Canada First rally on Sunday, twofold message. One, Conservatives are not dancing around the Donald Trump issue. Talked about it at numerous points, spoke directly to Americans, have taken out advertising with Donald Trump's face to say, you know, this person is a threat. Said clearly that will never be the 51st state. So for all of the critics that said Conservatives were being too light on Donald Trump, or that we may be too light on Donald Trump, I think the proof is there that that's not the case. But more importantly than that, I think really now a focus from the Conservatives on the substance and policy of what they want to see Canada become. And yes, there was a time and a place for a message that talked about how we got here. And I think that still it's fair to point out that Liberal policy has brought us, of the last 9 years, has brought Canada to a place of weakness, particularly economic weakness. But now the attention needs to be, what would Conservative leadership look like for Canada? Emphasizing to voters, if you want Conservative policy solutions, you have to vote Conservative. You can't vote for Justin Trudeau 2.0. So that is the more optimistic side of the equation, the more forward-looking side of the equation that I think the Conservatives are going to be leaning into for the next many weeks.
Michelle, your thoughts?
Well, I think that clearly the red and white and definitely, showing the Canadian colors at a Conservative rally isn't something that you usually see. I think that him trying to shed the angry man and desperately trying to pivot and just to find something that's going to work probably gives legitimacy to a lot of these polls and showing that they are converging, because clearly their own internal polling is saying the same thing. And I think that he's struggling to find his feet right now. And I think that it's not the campaign that they thought they were going to run. And he has to now be a different person. And he has to now actually stand up and be proud of Canada at a time when he's been trying to knock it down for the last number of years that he's been leader. So, I think that as they continue to struggle, I think that Mark Carney just has to stay focused on getting the job done, introducing himself to Canadians, and making sure that he is ready to go whenever it is that we have to go, because and keeping the eyes wide open that the biggest threat is Donald Trump to this country, and that's where his focus has got to be.
Okay, lots of perspectives to consider. Thank you to all of you for your input today. Our power panel, Émilie Nicolas, Michelle Caderio, Françoise Boivin, and Kate Harrison.